All right, everyone. Thanks for being on today. 12:02. I know there's probably going to be some more people also joining us. My name is Coach Kibbs. I coach the women's lacrosse team here at Linfield. And yeah, I think this is our 12th Cat Chat. So it's really exciting to be able to continue the conversation today. I'm really excited to welcome on Kristen Kilpak. We're going to be talking about, how to have a better conversation, how to be a better listener, and just overall how to navigate difficult discussions, which I think, over the past 6 months, this will prove to be a very useful tool for everyone. How about Doug? You want to go ahead and continue the intros?
Sure. I'm Doug Heyer, Senior Associate Athletic Director here at Linfield. This started my 21st year. I'm originally from Hawaii. I'm also a Linfield graduate, played football here back in the 80s. And I've recently stepped away from coaching football, moving in the direction of full-time athletic administration. So welcome, glad to have everyone here. Jane, you're up.
Hi, I'm Jane. I'm the Associate Athletic Director, Senior Women Administrator, and I'm part of the organizing team for these Cat Chats weekly. And really glad to have everybody here. We won't make everyone do introductions also. But I also wanted to say this while I do have the floor is feel free to go into participants and invite other people to this conversation too. Especially students, invite your peers at any point in the conversation, but glad to have everyone here. Natalie.
Yeah, hey everybody. Hi Kristen, thank you so much for joining us. I'm Natalie Welch. I am the sport management professor at Linfield. I also am faculty athletic representative and get to work with these awesome folks at Linfield Athletics. And I was wondering too, I see our president, Ron, do you want to say anything, President Davis?
Just happy to be here. Awesome dialogue and conversation. Looking forward to sharing. And like Natalie, actually looking forward to participating in conversations with professional management as we discuss topics within the business school about leadership and what it means.
Awesome, thank you. And also wanted to acknowledge our athletic director, Gary Kilgore, who's also on the call. Thanks, Gary.
Yay.
And welcome everyone. We're so excited to have everyone here.
All right, Kristen, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Kristin Killpack. I am a mediator and conflict resolution specialist, but I am also work in the corporate segment too, as a president of a spirits and beverage company called Ignite. But my passion is in mediation. I have a master's degree in conflict resolution and mediation and peace building from Cal State Dominguez Hills. And also I'm a trained mediator with the American Association of Arbitration. So thank you for having me here. This is an amazing opportunity to talk about some of my most favorite things. So I really appreciate being a part of it.
Awesome. Thank you, Kristen. To get us started, I am going to first share a little bit, just some reminders for our discussion today. We're glad to have you. Participants that are coming into the Zoom call, you will be muted, but we do welcome questions and your engagement. You do not have to have your video on, and you do not have to talk, as long as we would just like to have you here to listen. This is a safe community, safe space, so as long as you're here to be respectful and listen and engage in the dialogue, we're happy to have you. One thing, sorry, I'm going to skip through this slide. I wanted to also bring up real quick the difference between debate, discussion, and dialogue. Natalie and I were just on a call yesterday, kind of, talking about the conversation we were going to have today, and I thought it would be nice just to kind of, which I didn't even actually know the difference between this, and Kristen, you might have some input on this as well, but I just thought it would be refreshing or something to learn that's different about what the difference is between debate, discussion, and dialogue. And here, we're trying to encourage dialogue. So something collaborative that's respectful and where people can bring in their experiences, personal experiences and perspectives, as opposed to, being more dogmatic in their approach. We're going to share a quick video. It's about 10 minutes, but it's 10 ways to have a better conversation. And I think this is going to be kind of a great leeway into the dialogue that we're going to have with Kristen.
All right, I want to see a show of hands. How many of you have unfriended someone on Facebook because they said something offensive about politics or religion, childcare, food? And how many of you know at least one person that you avoid because you just don't want to talk to them? It used to be that in order to have a polite conversation, we just had to follow the advice of Henry Higgins and My Fair Lady, stick to the weather and your health. But these days, with climate change and anti-vaxxing, those subjects are not safe either. So this world that we live in, this world in which every conversation has the potential to devolve into an argument, where our politicians can't speak to one another, and where even the most trivial of issues have someone fighting both passionately for it and against it, it's not normal. Pew Research did a study of 10,000 American adults, and they found that at this moment, we are more polarized, we are more divided than we ever have been in history. We're less likely to compromise, which means we're not listening to each other, and we make decisions about where to live, who to marry, and even who our friends are going to be based on what we already believe. Again, that means we're not listening to each other. A conversation requires a balance between talking and listening, and somewhere along the way, we lost that balance. Now, part of that is due to technology, the smartphones that you all either have in your hands or close enough that you could grab them really quickly. According to Pew Research, about 1/3 of American teenagers send more than 100 texts a day. And many of them, almost most of them, are more likely to text their friends than they are to talk to them face to face. There's this great piece in The Atlantic. It was written by a high school teacher named Paul Barnwell. And he gave his kids a communication project. He wanted to teach them how to speak on a specific subject without using notes. And he said this: I came to realize that conversational competence might be the single most overlooked skill we fail to teach. Kids spend hours each day engaging with ideas and each other through screens, but rarely do they have an opportunity to hone their interpersonal communication skills. It might sound like a funny question, but we have to ask ourselves, is there any 21st century skill more important than being able to sustain coherent, confident conversation? Now, I make my living talking to people. Nobel Prize winners, truck drivers, billionaires, kindergarten teachers, heads of state, plumbers. I talk to people that I like. I talk to people that I don't like. I talk to some people that I disagree with deeply on a personal level, but I still have a great conversation with them. So I'd like to spend the next 10 minutes or so teaching you how to talk and how to listen. Many of you have already heard a lot of advice on this. Things like look the person in the eye, think of interesting topics to discuss in advance, nod and smile to show that you're paying attention. Repeat back what you just heard or summarize it. So I want you to forget all of that. It is crap. There is no reason to learn how to show you're paying attention if you are, in fact, paying attention. Now, I actually use the exact same skills as a professional interviewer that I do in regular life. So I'm going to teach you how to interview people, and that's actually going to help you learn how to be better conversationalists. Learn to have a conversation without wasting your time, without getting bored, and please God, without offending anybody. We've all had really great conversations. We've had them before. We know what it's like. The kind of conversation where you walk away feeling engaged and inspired, or where you feel like you've made a real connection or you've been perfectly understood. There is no reason why most of your interactions can't be like that. So I have 10 basic rules. I'm going to walk you through all of them, but honestly, if you just choose one of them and master it, you're already going to enjoy better conversations. Number one, don't multitask. And I don't mean just set down your cell phone or your tablet or your car keys or whatever's in your hand. I mean, be present. Be in that moment. Don't be thinking about your argument you have with your boss. Don't be thinking about what you're going to have for dinner. If you want to get out of the conversation, get out of the conversation. But don't be half in it and half out of it. Number two, don't pontificate. If you want to just state your opinion without any opportunity for response or argument or pushback or growth, write a blog. No, there's a really good reason why I don't allow pundits on my show, because they're really boring. If they're a conservative, they're going to hate Obama and food stamps and abortion. If they're a liberal, they're going to hate big banks and oil corporations and Dick Cheney. Totally predictable. And you don't want to be like that. You need to enter every conversation assuming that you have something to learn. The famed therapist Eb Scott Peck said that true listening requires a setting aside of oneself. And sometimes that means setting aside your personal opinion. He said that sensing this acceptance, the speaker will become less and less vulnerable and more likely to open up the inner recesses of his or her mind to the listener. Again, assume that you have something to learn. Bill Nye, everyone you will ever meet knows something that you don't. I put it this way, everybody is an expert in something. Number three, use open-ended questions. In this case, take a cue from journalists. Start your questions with who, what, where, when, why, or how. If you put in a complicated question, you're going to get a simple answer out. If I ask you, were you terrified? You're going to respond to the most powerful word in that sentence, which is terrified. And the answer is, yes, I was, or no, I wasn't. Were you angry? Yes, I was very angry. Let them describe it. They're the ones that know. Try asking them things like, what was that like? How did that feel? Because then they might have to stop for a moment and think about it. And you're going to get a much more interesting response. Number four, go with the flow. That means thoughts will come into your mind and you need to let them go out of your mind. We've heard interviews often in which a guest is talking for several minutes and then the host comes back in and asks a question which seems like it comes out of nowhere or it's already been answered. That means the host probably stopped listening 2 minutes ago because he thought of this really clever question and he was just bound and determined to say that. And we do the exact same thing. We're sitting there having a conversation with someone and then we remember that time that we met Hugh Jackman in a coffee shop. And we stop listening. Stories and ideas are going to come to you. You need to let them come and let them go. Number five, if you don't know, say that you don't know. Now, people on the radio, especially on NPR, are much more aware that they're going on the record. And so they're more careful about what they claim to be an expert in and what they claim to know for sure. Do that. Err on the side of caution. Talk should not be cheap. Number six, don't equate your experience with theirs. If they're talking about having lost a family member, don't start talking about the time that you lost a family member. If they're talking about the trouble that they're having at work, don't tell them about how much you hate your job. It's not the same. It is never the same. All experiences are individual. And more importantly, it is not about you. You don't need to take that moment to prove how amazing you are or how much you've suffered. Somebody asked Stephen Hawking once what his IQ was, and he says, I have no idea. People who brag about their IQs are losers. Conversations are not a promotional opportunity. Number seven, try not to repeat yourself. It's condescending and it's really boring. And we tend to do it a lot, especially in work conversations or in conversations with our kids. We have a point to make, so we just keep rephrasing it over and over. Don't do that. Number eight, stay out of the weeds. Frankly, people don't care about the years, the names, the dates, all those details that you're struggling to come up with in your mind. They don't care. What they care about is you. They care about what you're like, what you have in common. So forget the details. Leave them out. Number nine, this is not the last one, but it is the most important one. Listen. I cannot tell you how many really important people have said that listening is perhaps the number one most important skill that you could develop. Buddha said, and I'm paraphrasing, if your mouth is open, you're not learning. And Calvin Coolidge said, no man ever listened his way out of a job. Why do we not listen to each other? Number one, we'd rather talk. When I'm talking, I'm in control. I don't have to hear anything I'm not interested in. I'm the center of attention. I can bolster my own identity. But there's another reason. We get distracted. The average person talks at about 225 words per minute, but we can listen at up to 500 words per minute. So our minds are filling in those other 275 words. And look, I know it takes effort and energy to actually pay attention to someone. But if you can't do that, you're not in a conversation. You're just two people shouting out barely related sentences in the same place. You have to listen to one another. Stephen Covey said it very beautifully. He said, most of us don't listen with the intent to understand. We listen with the intent to reply. One more rule, and number 10, and it's this one: be brief. All of this boils down to the same basic concept, and it is this one: be interested in other people. You know, I grew up with a very famous grandfather, and there was kind of a ritual in my home.
Okay, I think that was a nice segue now into Kristen. Everyone's ready to listen with intent and understanding. Kristen, I have your PowerPoint pulled up here. I'm gonna share my screen again.
I'd forgotten about that miniskirt quote. That was perfect.
Yeah, it's always good to have, you know, some humor, keep everyone interested.
Sure. So I thought what I talk about today is really the story of, you know, obviously the power of the story. You know, storytelling is so important. And when I first heard about what you guys were doing here, first of all, let me applaud you guys for doing this. It is such an uncomfortable time. One thing I want to say is I came across something this week that I thought was poignant. And I'm sorry that I can't credit the person that originally said it because somebody had told me, but one of the things that about me is I happen to be Caucasian. I happen to be a woman. These are all things that I was born. I don't necessarily think they define me, and but it does basically create my experience and my point of view. Now, having said that, I don't know what it's like to be raised another way. And the only way I can be educated and figure it out is by listening. Were you able to get I'm not seeing it's coming. No problem. Why I decided to come into be a mediator and do mediation was one thing that I always realized is there is such a big breakdown in communication. And so much of that has to do with how we were raised or how we were brought up or not having the tools in order to have a healthy conversation, what we just saw in the video. So just a quick breakdown of what a mediation does or mediator does is we're really just here to facilitate conversations. We don't actually tell our own story. We help people tell their own story. It's mediation. There's all sorts. We have mediations in the court systems that help with community law. We have advocates. You name it, we're using mediation now. We're trying to get away from, not necessarily get away from using the court system, but let's be honest, in the court system, people don't feel heard necessarily, and they don't get their stories out. So that's really what I'm doing, is getting two conflicting parties together and really trying to get them to communicate in a way that they can each hear, right? And not just hear what we just saw, here to, you know, just hear, but here to understand. You can go to the next slide for me. That would be great. And, you know, for sake of our conversation today, you know, I know this is some of the things that you guys have been talking about. We're trying to rid our country of prejudice, and that includes racism, sexism, and obviously discrimination against our LGBTQ plus, which is running rampant right now. We're very uncomfortable, and it's a systemic issue that we've had for a very long time, and it needs to be discussed, and we need to be ready to hear it, and we need to be ready to hear the story behind that. I'm a bit of a storyteller, and because that's how I believe that people can learn. I love hearing other people's stories. All day long, I'll listen. I want to know how you grew up. I want to know the problems that you faced. I want to know how I was implicated in that problem. Something that I think you guys have come across lately is people are getting put into boxes. And it gets very uncomfortable when we get put into boxes. And sometimes it gets uncomfortable when somebody's telling us a story, and it might seem like, oh my goodness, they're talking about us. And now all of a sudden I have the weight on my shoulders to necessarily right all the wrongs of the people before me. And that's a very hard position to be in. And I wanted to kind of share something that I thought was prevalent. I can't really speak to racism, but I can speak to some issues with gender, and something that I've been through. And I think that it's important for this discussion to talk about, because I think this is what we're all experiencing right now. And that's, I'm not sure if you guys recall, I guess it was probably 3 or 4, actually it may have been around the last election. And there was a story that came out where Vice President Pence talked about how he doesn't take meetings with women by himself. He will never meet with a woman by himself. And my husband was telling me the story. And my husband, a tall, beautiful, good-looking white guy, said, I can totally understand why that happens. And I have never been so sad in my life of saying, but hon, you realize that that's me he's not taking the meeting with. And he said, well, do it some other way. And I said, but you realize that that hurts my career and my business and takes food off of our children's plates. And he wasn't ready to hear that. And he didn't understand at that moment why I was so hurt by this. And all he could think about in the moment was I was yelling at him. He was identifying with Pence. He thought I was mad at him. He thought I was somehow saying all men were like this, and he wasn't ready to kind of hear my story. And to be honest, I thought, I shouldn't even have to tell you my story. You live in my home, and you see how hard I struggle in a very male-dominated industry, not my mediation business, but the other one. And to be quite honest, I'm still not ready to have that conversation. There's still a divide. When I just heard on the video just now about how many times you avoid somebody and to not have that conversation, it's in my own house, guys. And I'm sure it's in your own house as well. If it's not in your own house, it's at the Thanksgiving dinner, or, you know, it's people that you work with, and it's uncomfortable, but we have to be uncomfortable. We have to be willing to listen, and we have to be able to share those stories. The story about my husband and Pence kept coming over, and all week I was thinking about it. And I thought, should I share this? I'm sharing it on a Zoom call with people I don't really know, possibly could end up online. And how mad is my husband going to be at me for sharing this story? But it's an important story to be told. I think it's very humanizing to say, hey, I love this person. He's hurting me by saying this. He doesn't understand. But I also have to remember, how could he understand? Things came, you know, my husband did not have the same experiences that I had in life. He grew up in a different area than I did. He grew up different economical status than I did. And honestly, he's never heard the microaggressions that I've heard against women. He really hasn't. And he's so defensive. And I don't know how to break that down besides just continuously telling him my story. And I need to do it in a way that I'm not yelling at him or putting him in a box and saying, don't you understand what you white men do to so many of us? That's not fair, because how can I blame him for something that he's never necessarily experienced? Now, having said that, now, you know, he's seeing it. Maybe he's not coming around as quickly. It's just what I have to really spend the time. I listened to one of your previous chats, and Coach John talked about his the story with Rocco Carly. And I just thought, oh my gosh, what a powerful, powerful story. I'm so glad I got an opportunity to listen to that. And I feel like if so many people understood that story, I don't know, is Coach John on the discussion with us right now?
Yes,
Yeah.
I am here. I am here. I'm here, and I'm listening to you. I would love to respond to you,
Yeah,
but I don't want to interrupt your story. But I
was hoping, if you didn't mind, because I don't know how many people were on the same conversation, but if you could tell us a little bit more about that experience and about, you know, you talked about what you talked to him about when you, after that kind of happened. I'm so interested in where he is today and what kind of effect you had on him. So I apologize for turning it over to you so quickly, but I've been thinking about that all week. I want to know.
No, okay. So Rocco Carly is his name. He is somebody who I trained, as many of us in athletics know. You have to do, like, you got to have a side hustle, right? You have to have a side hustle. So I was training athletes for basketball. He went to Kennedy High School, which is in Mount Angel, Oregon. And, you know, I trained him probably about 3 or 4 years. Rocco's father died when Rocco was 11. So I took Rocco under my wing in order to help him in his athletic career. Rocco's a big boy. Rocco's 6'6", 240, and was playing wide receiver, okay? And so he ended up winning a state championship in high school. So he's a pretty good player. And I remember taking him and sitting him down and helping him register for the NCAA clearinghouse, I took him to Oregon State University for his visit. I went with him, was standing on the field with him on his visit there. And so he went to OSU, and an audio recording of him impersonating a Southern gentleman was released on Twitter. Okay. And in this video, I'm just going to, you know, you can Google the video, but he talks about he says some pretty disturbing things. He's like, you know, I think you should take all of the gays and the Muslims and the Jews and the niggers and burn them all, is what he says in this video. And in this audio recording, and somebody tweeted it. So immediately, like, obviously the world we live in, it catches wildfire, right? Gets retweeted, and it's on ESPN, and he gets dismissed probably within about 3 hours from the time the audio recording was posted on Twitter. He got dismissed from the college. So his mother reached out to me just in tears, and she was like, I don't know what I'm going to do. And, you know, people were riding by her home, making threats to her and her children, calling them racist, all behind what Rocco's comments were. So I reached out to Rocco, and I let Rocco know this was very bad. This was like all-time bad. Especially, it's bad to ever say. And then even with all that's going on in our country, this was like 2 days after George Floyd, just so you guys have a timetable of when this happened. This was like 2 days after George Floyd was murdered. So I told Rocco, I'm like, it hurts to hear you say that, especially knowing how much I've been in your life. Like, I've been at your games. I was there at your senior night in football. I helped you, you know, I took you along through this process. So, like, I've been there for you. So it hurts to hear you say that, because, yeah, you're talking about me. But you need me now more than ever. So I'm here for you. And we did offer him a spot at South Puget Sound. He actually ended up running into some more drama, where some family issues, family falling apart, some drugs and stuff. So it's gotten like worse as a fallout, because nobody talks about like the backlash of that action, right? And how that impacts those people around you. So like his sisters have ended up transferring schools right now because people were, saying some not so nice things to them as well. So Rocco currently is going to the Army. He's going to the Army and trying to go somewhere and get a fresh start. But at South Puget Sound, we were planning to welcome him with open arms and give him a second chance. But he is going to the military. To answer your question as to where he is currently, him and I do still talk probably twice a week. So we all are still engaged in conversation. But I did want to respond to you when you were talking about the Pence thing and your husband, and you said something that stuck with me when you said, well, he's never been a woman, so how could he understand? And I'm like, well,
no,
I've never stolen anything. I've never attacked a cop. I've never robbed anybody. But people that look like me are losing their lives.
Yeah.
So I think, okay, so nothing grows without pressure, right? I live on a farm. So if you don't bury the seed in the soil, right, that pressure from the soil, it won't grow. So I think, I want to encourage you and applaud you for standing up for who you are, but I want to encourage you that, yeah, you do have to have those tough conversations.
Sure do. And by the way, I want to just interrupt and say, I'm not giving him a pass. Okay. We might not have to grow up a certain way to understand something's wrong. So I want to just want to get that out. My point to that was, if I'm not going to sit here and tell him why it's wrong, if I'm not going to sit here and uncomfortably say why that is so hurtful and why that is not acceptable, I can't expect him to grow.
Right.
So just for clarity.
No, and I didn't take it as you were like giving him a pass or an out. I'm just saying, from my understanding, I did not think you were doing that. I'm just encouraging you to love him to the truth, right? And it may not make sense coming from anybody else but you, right? Because you are his spouse. Does that make sense? Because you guys are so close. So, and I think that is what it takes, So for example, I'll share this with you, and I know we're on live, which is fine, but my in-laws, they are farmers, and so there was somebody here on the farm who flew a Trump flag on one of the combines while they were combining the field. And now my mother-in-law flies a Black Lives Matter flag at her house, just so that you know, right? And so she didn't put it up until like after she saw color, right? Where she had my son, whose skin is like as dark as mine. She was taking him back to Florida, and somebody stopped her and asked him, "Do you know who this lady is?" Right? In the airport. And I had told her, pack his birth certificate so that you have some form of identification. And she didn't get it until that day, right? Like that was like the first day she saw color, right? Because there were people like asking this little Black kid with this white grandmother, right? Like, what are you doing? So anyway, it's great. She's a great sport. It's awesome. But the point is, we had to have a conversation with my father-in-law right? About like, I said to him, I said, is this the stance of the company? Is the stance of the company Trump 2020? Like, are you going to hang one next in the warehouse where I work? Because if that's the case, then I'm going to quit. Because I don't wear Black Lives Matter t-shirts to work. I don't, right? Like, I come in and I do my job. I don't say, hey, we need to vote yes on this and no on that, you know? So I think it takes us having the conversations with those people who we are close enough to. Like, I went to a white supremacist workshop today, a workshop on white supremacy, and it was taught by a Black guy to white people, right? Like, literally, white people, like, you got to do your part, right? And learning and understanding why, you know, like, this white supremacy and this white privilege, like, you got to understand how this has impacted your life also. Does that make sense to everybody?
Absolutely.
Okay.
No,
So thank you for sharing.
No, I appreciate you. Obviously, your perspective, I really was interested in learning more about what it is that you're going through and the things you've seen. And obviously that experience with Rocco is very powerful. And the fact that you've shared it, I think, is important. And when I was bringing up the, you know, being able to hear the story and being able to take that in is really important. And the other thing I wanted to kind of share with you guys, and I'm trying to be I'm being pretty vulnerable here, because I think I wanted to show how important that vulnerability is. I grew up outside of Philadelphia, and in the 80s, it was very segregated. It's still pretty segregated, to be quite honest. And I remember, you know, wanting to go over to friends' houses who were African American, and their moms saying they didn't want me over there. And obviously that was happening on my side too, in my neighborhood. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And, you know, we grow up thinking a certain way and thinking things are acceptable. I'm starting to get choked up because I'm actually going to talk about a friend of mine who passed away this weekend, and I haven't seen him, you know, since we were kids. But I remember saying some absolutely vulgar things to him, and just some unacceptable things based on race. And I think about why I did that at the time. I was learning it from the neighborhood. I was learning it from my friends. I was learning it from my home. I didn't actually believe any of the things that I was saying. It was more of, how can I hurt this person standing in front of me? And now I sit here, you know, 35 years later, and I'm hearing these stories about racism, and I'm feeling it, you guys. I'm feeling guilt. I'm feeling shame. And even though that's not who I am today, I'm feeling it. And the reason why I bring it up is I have to sit here and listen to it. It's so important, because I have to know who I was hurting and how badly I was hurting the kids that I went to school with when I would say things like that. So again, I'm admitting to it. I feel terrible. I'm so sad, because I think about how I could have made amends, talked to my friends from childhood to say how sorry I am. And he passed away last weekend. So I'll never have that opportunity. But the opportunity that I do have is continuing the conversation, sharing my stories that I had, sharing who I was, and the good, bad, and ugly, and continuing to share that story with my own children so that they understand what the world was like in when I was growing up, and how unacceptable that is. Now, when I'm talking about storytelling too, I brought up the fact that we're talking about in our own homes and in our families and with our coworkers, but these storytelling techniques and peace building go beyond that, right? I'm not sure if it was the slide before this or the slide after this, if you wouldn't mind. Yes, this one. We are really using storytelling and peace building in a very, very large level. You know, we've had experiences where academic groups have gone over to different areas globally, internationally, and brought groups together that, you know, have experienced a lot of pain. And the only way they can really rebuild is by allowing them to tell their stories. So you see storytelling practices in South Africa between Blacks and Whites, Ireland, Protestants and Catholics, Germany, Holocaust survivors, and I wrote Nazis, but Germans, and also Cyprus between the Turks and the Greeks. And it's everyone's right to tell their story. Now, we hope that people on the other side can listen and will be receptive to our story, but telling our story and having courage to tell our story and having the courage to listen to people's stories, so incredibly important. It takes courage on both sides. And I brought up the information about my childhood because, man, I'm telling you, it's taking me some courage to talk about it, but it's also taking me courage just to turn on the television and see what we're seeing, and just thinking to myself, my God, how could I cause pain on this gentleman I grew up with, knowing that he's actually been through those experiences? Like, I also have to show myself mercy at the same time and know that I have to learn from that. And I just wanted to share that with you guys as well. And anybody is welcome to kind of interrupt me too and share some, maybe an opportunity of, you know, listening to somebody's story and how prophetic it is and how much it changed them. So I don't know if anybody is courageous enough to kind of talk about how stories have changed them as well.
If anyone wants to share their story, feel free to jump on. But I will say, Kristen, I'm like so thankful for your vulnerability and courage, because I mean, I just think we just don't hear about that enough, right? A lot of people want to put on this armor and look beyond it and not admit to a lot of things, but to be vulnerable, I think, is just like a rare quality to have for a lot of people. So thank you for that.
No, thanks. I don't feel like I've done anything that deserve any sort of praise or anything like that. It's more of we got to be okay with it. We have to be okay with listening and admitting to things that we've done that we're not proud of. It's important.
Well, and I think about my lacrosse team too, and like Coach Willis and his basketball team. It's to hear other people be vulnerable, talk about these things, to make it to normalize it more, to, you know, that it is okay to have these conversations. It is okay to admit being wrong, and that, you know, you are going to show yourself mercy and you are going to learn from it. And what can I do with the opportunity to move forward? You know, I think it's just really powerful to hear, especially from someone else. So
Thanks.
I want to say thank you, Kristen, and also to encourage you, or to anybody else who may be feeling the same way and may be listening to you. I think this is how progress is made. And as a person of color, you know, all I can do is ask that you know, see where the misstep was and then treat me equally. Right. So it's like kind of like that whole thing, like if you know better, you'll do better. Mm-hmm. So, you know what I mean? Like you talked about teaching your children and sharing things with your children. So I think that's all that, right? That's all that I can ask of you. Obviously, I can't ask you to go back and take back what you said for whatever years ago or whoever you listened to or whatever, but making the moving forward better. Right? Making the moving forward better, and understanding that those things that you were saying, yes, they were hurtful, and no, a lot of times they're not even true, you know? So I appreciate you sharing that and being vulnerable in that. And that takes a lot of courage, right? That takes a ton of courage. So I appreciate that. And if there's, you know, any other conversation or anything I can do to help, please don't hesitate to reach out.
Thank you. And again, one of the reasons why I thought about it and why I thought about sharing about it is because I wonder if, you know, having done some things that I'm not proud of in my younger days, is that one of the reasons why I get so uncomfortable hearing some of the things that are happening now? you know, and so I wonder, and, you know, is that why when somebody tells you something that's happening and people, you know, become dismissive of a situation, you know, and that's not happening, you know, is it because they're internalizing because they have something that, you know, either they grew up with that they didn't necessarily realize at the time it was wrong, and, you know, now they see it now. I wonder how much that affects the conversation now. That's one of the reasons too. So if anyone wants to speak to
Kristen, thank you so much. This is Natalie. I grew up on a reservation. I'm Cherokee, and storytelling is such a huge part of, I think it's just embedded in our culture, and especially oral storytelling. Yeah, oral storytelling, and the fact that we don't have written records, but that doesn't change that we have a history that's just as valid as maybe what's written, you know, written in history books. But I love everything that you were saying, but I think even in our own communities within, you know, it's not just black and white, right? We all know it's not a binary, but like my own mom, for example, she's spent most of her life on the reservation, and she watches, you know, the local news or even like the national news, and she sees protests and things happening in these big cities where she doesn't have any kind of context, and she gets this negative connotation with protesting and things like that. And so I try to explain to her like why they're doing that, and maybe why that they're having to result to that. And I'm just curious, you talked a little bit about it before, but maybe more, because I feel like maybe our students and even us and our, you know, our faculty and staff, like having those hard conversations with our families, and any and then on the media side as well, any suggestions you have with like trying to explain to people why maybe media framing is always tricky to navigate.
Absolutely. You know, there's kind of an art to storytelling too. And I keep talking about storytelling because going back to the very beginning when you guys were talking about, you know, debate, discussion, and dialogue, right? That was awesome, by the way. Very impressed with that. You know, with the storytelling portion of it, it's obviously part of a dialogue. And one thing when we are talking to our loved ones or even a complete stranger and we want to get our message across, we have to speak calmly. We have to, and most importantly, we have to speak so everybody understands. And when framing the stories on social media, I think you just did a kind of a great job of saying to your family member, you know, this is actually what happened, and even kind of bringing it back to something that you've probably experienced on the reservation too. It's best to put that sort of things in context like that to make people understand. Would you mind putting slide 5 up for me? Page 5. Sorry, I didn't number I would be getting an F for my presentation because I didn't put it together properly. But when you're telling your story and you're trying to build peace, understand the slide before that, that the whole idea behind it is that you get to counter stereotypes, you get to build empathy, you get to break down the defensiveness, and you get to create commonalities. I'm sure during the 2 stories I told today, one about the childhood friend and also with my husband, all of this is probably hit with you guys, right? So we need to make sure that when we're telling our stories that we're doing it calmly, we're doing it in a way that people don't become defensive, and that they can let down and they can realize they have commonalities too. Have I ever been stopped by the police and treated the way that I see African Americans treated? Absolutely, I have not. I can't even imagine what that is like at all. So when I hear somebody telling that story though, I can say, oh my gosh, I have had an incredible amount of fear. One of you guys brought it up the other day, or in one of your previous talks about women not being able to run at night. And again, not the same thing by any means, but you know, I have had fear of somebody walking up on me and being terrified of what's going to happen. Not the same, but I can sit there and go, oh my goodness, I think I can sit here in that feeling and somewhat understand. And again, break down the defensiveness of hearing that and going, you know what, that doesn't have anything to do with me, but I would love to help change that. I'm so glad people just share that story with me. So I don't know if I answered the question very well, Natalie, but really we just have to understand who we're talking to and realize that they're going to need these steps kind of brought to them, and just be calm and patient with them, and realize also it doesn't get done in one conversation. A lot of times this has to keep going, but we really do. There's a reason why our kids do, you know, Aesop's fables, right? And we read them, Dr. Seuss books and things like that. We learn better through story and not necessarily by someone saying, just don't do that. So it's so important. I kind of went off on several different, I can talk until 4 o'clock if you guys want me to about all these different stories. I just love it.
That's so great. And what you kind of mentioned too before about just not wanting to face feelings of guilt and or just feelings of uncomfortableness. I think that's been a huge part of kind of what's been happening recently with people, especially talking about, you know, changing what's taught history wise, you know, and like having to confront that. And so I really appreciate you again for being vulnerable and sharing that.
Oh, I appreciate it. Thank you. Anybody else have anything they wanted to kind of share?
I want to ask you a question, Kristen. This is Gerardo Ochoa. I'm a Director of Community Relations and Special Assistant to the President here at Linfield. Thank you for joining us. I'm also a big fan of storytelling, and I always struggle with the following question because for some people, sharing their story is traumatizing, and it gets re-traumatizing over and over and over again. The more you share it, the more vulnerable you become, and you keep getting re-traumatized. I'm a firm believer in the impact and the power of stories. But what are your perspectives on finding that balance? You know, particularly when we ask women, people of color, to share their story of trauma over and over and over at the expense of teaching people who don't have that experience. What are your perspectives on finding that balance?
You know, I found that when they share stories, you're right, there is a lot of trauma that's involved. I'd never want somebody who's not prepared to tell their story, first of all. You have to be ready. Again, I'll share something personal. The anniversary just came up, but my father was actually killed on his motorcycle about 11 years ago. A woman was reading a map and she hit him and he died, and it really affected our family. 10 months later, my mother passed away, and we don't really know why. But however, her will was sitting on the table. So we pretty much feel that it could, you know, she took her own life because she couldn't handle the death of my father. Now I share that story because here I can say it without, I mean, it hurts me every time I mention it, but it's important that I tell the story because mental health, we really need to work on our mental health and support people and understand, again, the power of the story. When I tell people what happened to my family, you know, they take something away from that, and hopefully it's not pity. I don't want anyone's, you know, pity. If everybody goes through something in life, everybody handles things differently. Everyone's going to lose their parents at some point or a loved one, but to be able to talk about it and use that story to say, hey, make sure you're wearing your helmet, even though my father was wearing his helmet. Let's be attentive drivers, but also let's take care of our family members when their mental health is suffering. And let's make sure we're checking in with people. I tell that it's very vulnerable to talk about that. It's painful, but I'll tell you, every time I've told that story, it's gotten less and less painful, as far as something in me is saying, okay, I'm stronger. I'm stronger today than I was yesterday. I'm stronger, you know, every time I tell the story. So I hope that answers your question a little bit. However, again, I go back to the very first thing. If you're not ready, you're not ready. And I don't want anyone to ever feel like they should talk about something like a sexual assault or, you know, racism. Write it down. And that's the other thing I love doing. Every time you write down your story, it gives you power too, until you're ready to tell it. Does that help a little bit? All right. Thank you.
I think I have a follow-up question though to that. So Gerardo, I'm glad you asked that question. I'm also a white female. And so what I wonder is, and Gerardo, correct me if this is not what you're getting at, but when there's a power structure in place, and someone is repeating a story where they are vulnerable, how there is definitely that perspective of you need to be ready to tell your story, and there have been times in my life where I'm not ready to share something, or then I am ready to share something, but when there's a potential threat, how do we address that piece of it? How can someone share, or what is the benefit to that person sharing when there potentially is a threat to them for doing so?
Oh gosh, you know what? I'm going to turn that over and see if anybody else has any opinion on that too, while I think about it for a moment, because you're right. I mean, we don't want to sit there and be in a room where we're at risk telling our story. It is important. We want to make sure that we're safe. But there is a lot of vulnerability in telling your story, especially online, because we can have retribution, and we know that. Does anybody else have any stories that they can share that maybe that's happened to? I feel bad about calling people out individually, but maybe somebody.
I don't have a story, but I think, you know, while you're thinking about your response as well, when we're talking about these difficult conversations and stories and, you know, engaging somebody, like if you want to hear somebody's story or you're starting a conversation with someone, I did a little bit of research on all of these, you know, how to have a difficult conversation. And some of the main things that stuck out to me were, you know, really making sure you know what the purpose is of the conversation. Like if you're asking someone to tell a story, why are you asking them to tell that story? You know, being mindful of, you know, what's the purpose behind that? Like going through this checklist of what's your assumption about that person and their feelings. And, you know, impact doesn't equal intent. So making sure that you are having an understanding of what their intentions are, and considering like your own emotions. You know, are you having this conversation or asking about something because you're triggered by a personal historical experience? You know, what's your own attitude and perception in the conversation? And I think, you know, a lot of it is about perspective and, you know, how you're perceiving things, your needs and fears that you're trying to address. Maybe you don't even realize it within the conversation. And, you know, I think when we're asking for stories, especially, you know, if someone is having to relive a traumatic experience through their story, really, you know, maybe having that empathy, listening without the intent to reply, but listening with understanding. I think, yeah.
Those are all good points. And, you know, I just was thinking while you were talking about that is that mediation, you know, we say mediation is self-willing, right? We've got to have two people who are willing to hear. Okay. So I think this kind of goes to speak to that. We have to make sure it's the right time, the right place with the right people that we're telling our story. And sometimes you can finesse it and create an atmosphere that somebody can hear. But I think setting the table is really important when you're doing your storytelling. I think I misunderstood the question too, is that, you know, whether someone's being asked to share the story and they're not ready versus them being in a space where they can tell the story, they feel safe. And, you know, going back to the mediation and the breakdown in communication, one of the biggest parts of my job is to make sure that it's a safe experience. The power is not one-sided. And in mediation, when it's a one-on-one conflict, we shut it down. If we see a power struggle, if we see just how you set up this conversation in the very beginning, you have to set standards for that to make sure that people who are sharing their story and the vulnerability are going to be safe. So I think that was probably what you were looking more towards, I think, than to answer that question. Sound about right? Or do we have some chats too? Ah, Miles, Philly. I see someone's from Philadelphia originally, so they probably shared my experience of what it was like in the 80s, but I lost my Philadelphia accent though. That's why you guys can't tell where I'm from. Does anybody else have any questions? It was a different world back then. You know, I can go on forever too, but in the 80s, we experienced something called the MOVE movement, where half of Philadelphia burnt down. And it was a big problem between our government and an organization. And a lot of people died, and it created a lot of segregation between white people and people of color. And it really hurt a lot of people in the way that people grew up there. And I'm one of those people. You know, I still talk to some of my high school friends, and I remember watching the television during that time and watching those row houses burn. And, you know, my family was in support of the police department. And I have friends whose family members were in that building. So it was a very interesting time. I wish we could have had these kind of discussions that we're having now back in the 80s, because I think about how many people grew up not understanding what was really happening during that time. And sir, I don't know if you remember that experience or not and wanted to say anything about that, but that was a defining moment, and it was a bad defining moment of how people were raised in that area and feelings about racism. I should have talked about that today. That would have been something good to share, but I put in my presentation at the very last page a book that really spoke to me about the story of sharing storytelling, about a book about peace building and storytelling. And it was from, is authored by one of my professors at California State Dominguez Hills, and about how he took 5 trips over to Cyprus and really helped with basically the civil unrest there. And it was young people who finally said, we've had enough and we want to tell our stories, and it's going to be uncomfortable, but we've got to find a way to live together. And it's very powerful. So if you guys want some light reading, please take a look at this book. It's very powerful. That's right. There's Mr. Davis put in a link to talk a little bit about what I'm talking about with the MOVE movement, and how it destroyed a whole block of homes and a lot of people. So how do I deal with trauma in my practice? Was that the, do we address that? When working with people, traumatic events. Well, we just spoke about that a little bit. In my practice for mediation, one of the things that I kind of touched on in the very beginning is, with mediation, we make sure that each person has the same amount of time to tell their story. And we want to really make sure that people understand that their story can be heard. So hopefully I addressed that question. Now, that's really it for me. I guess I really wanted to tell you guys, number one, how just thrilled I am that you're having these conversations about how powerful it is, how I know that for a university that is primarily Caucasian, it's a huge step. Everybody should be doing this. Everybody should be sitting in this. And you know, athletics are so important too, because you're working, you play with people, you play against people from different backgrounds, different cultures, different races. And you learn more through athletics, I think, than sometimes you can learn in your classroom when it comes to just daily life practices. So I really appreciate you guys letting me come speak to you.
Yeah, Kristen, thank you so much for spending your time with us. I really appreciate all of your stories and being vulnerable and just like opening up the discussion. That's what this is all about, and just being frank and candid with everyone. So, you know, we're really thankful to have you and to have had a chance to listen to you and your tools and resources. So
I'll have my husband come join us next time. We'll see how.
Yeah. Yeah, really, anyone's welcome. And hopefully, you know, when we're just going to keep continuing the discussion. And, you know, I think the theme of 2020 really is how to learn how to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. Right.
Absolutely.
And, you know, I think, you know, learning how to have these difficult conversations, you know, staying calm, being empathetic, listening to understand are the major facets to hopefully being able to evolve in the way that we engage with each other and hopefully grow from that. So thank you so much. You are free to go. We're going to stay on for probably about another 20 minutes. If anyone has any stories they want to share, thoughts, comments, concerns, questions, we can continue to talk till about, you know, 1:30. But thank you, Kristen, so much.
Thank you, guys. And one last thing too is that I let Coach Lindsay know that I'm actually putting the blog together, not of my own stories, but for other people. So if anybody ever has anything powerful that they want to get across, I'm broaching all sorts of subjects. A lot what we talked about here, gender issues, racism, trauma, anything that really has to do with conflict. And they can be uplifting, they can be stories that haven't really had an opportunity to be resolved yet. These are all things that I just want to give people a platform to talk about. So,
awesome.
Thank you, guys.
I'll get the link from you for that blog as well, and then I'll
Absolutely.
share it with our community too.
Great. Thank you, guys.
Can you hear me?
Thank you.
All right.
Lindsay? Lindsay?
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, did Kristen leave?
Yeah, she did.
Oh, okay. I wanted to talk to her about something.
Okay. Well, I can share your email with her, or you can ask. We can talk about it here.
Okay. Well, I'm Laylee. I'm Lindsay's sister. And sorry, my voice is kind of shaky because I have really bad anxiety, but just ignore that. But so like I study at this school called SOAS, which stands for oh my God, my brain. Something Oriental and African Studies, and School for Oriental and African Studies, yeah. And so in the school, we talk a lot about like decolonizing language and basically just decolonizing everything. And when I came back home for lockdown, like I realized that like a lot of the things that I listened to, like from my family and from my friends, it's very like, it's racist, but it's very like subliminal racism. So we don't even like realize that the language that we use or the jokes that we tell are racist. And anytime I would say like, oh, that's racist, or, you know, this is like white savior or whatever, my dad, who is Iranian, would be like, you know, if anyone knows anything about racism, it's me. I experience microaggressions all the time. Like, you are so privileged and you have so much privilege to be going to this school that teaches you about these things, that it's not fair for you to come home and call everyone racist because they don't have the opportunities that you have to like learn about these things. And it made me think about how language is very colonial and academia itself is very colonial. And that's why I'm really passionate about post-colonial studies, just because like just decolonizing language and the root words of these words that we say all the time, like where do they come from? And I think it's important, like when you're talking to someone who has different experiences or hasn't had the same opportunities that you've had to like learn about certain things, to switch codes, kind of, not that you're like dumbing down information in a condescending way, but just kind of like being more emotionally intelligent and like adapting to their experiences. And like my uncle, he's a Trump supporter, and I get triggered by a lot of the things that he says. They're really just misogynistic and sexual, but like you kind of just have to like not look past it, but just kind of like empathize at the same time and understand that that's just kind of how he's grown up, and maybe in a subtle way kind of teach him things, but not in a condescending, like, you know, privileged kind of way. And another thing is cancel culture is really popular, like among like kids my age, like in our early 20s, like on social media, everyone's like, oh, cancel, she's canceled. And I think cancel culture is just like, if we replace it with critical thinking, we'd have like more empathetic conversations instead of emotional reactions. Like by talking, we can like learn to separate honest mistakes with actual hate. And I think for like storytelling, it's kind of going beyond like how one mind is simply mirroring another's mind. I think it's the neurological basis of human exchange, and that's so special. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, Layla, you're good.
Okay. And I think that's really special. And I think it requires like a level of mindfulness. And I think we have to like recognize like what's going on in our own minds while we're listening, because you might not hear the last paragraph about what someone else is saying. Even when you're reading a book, are you like really reading those words? You have to go back and reread them. Like you should ask that person, like, what did you just say? Because I mean, like, how do you become aware that you're thinking of something else while someone else is talking to you? Because lots of times we don't realize that we're in these like fugue states of mind. Like listening is like listening to our bodies, to the sounds of the life around us, you know, like that grounds us in the it's the present moment. It's true reciprocity. It's receiving aliveness. And I think aliveness, but like in the form of your voice or of another's voice, it's the form of like stillness in a room even. So like when we receive it, it can be like really hard to let in. But I think if we know our own mortality, if we like really understood that our bodies will be a corpse and that time of death is uncertain, but it is certain. And if we truly understand that, like I feel like we'd have fewer moments where we regret having wasted our time or somebody else's time. And I think like I've heard some people who have terminal illnesses, sometimes they say things like how grateful they are that they've never felt more alive, or what, you know, like I think that's what they're pointing to, is that they're like acutely sensitive to the fleeting nature of being alive. And I think like viewing the concepts of listening and storytelling as like a creative partnership that builds trust, but at the same time like imparting information, I think that's like a good way to look at it. So
I think from sister to sister, I think you've had a lot of buildup that you've been needing to get that off your chest. And I'm really
not listening a lot, because I always talk, I always interrupt. And like I study anthropology, like for my dissertation, I'm very pro-Palestinian, and I had to interview a Zionist who's doing work in Israel and Palestine to bring conflict resolution. And she's pretty much going about it totally wrong, and I'm disagreeing with her on every level. But as like an anthropologist, you have to be really objective, and you have to like really like listen and like put yourself aside. And like I don't know, like what that lady said in the TED Talk, I'm trying to practice like not interrupting and just like letting people say what they want to say. So
well, I think you had a lot of really valuable information to put out, and I really appreciate you know, and I think a lot of what you're saying too, especially as like someone younger in their 20s, kind of recognizing the difference between like cancel culture and just dismissing people, as opposed to, you know, really trying to identify where they come from, their perspectives. I think that's really powerful. And to have that mindfulness about you. Yeah, I think a lot of people don't.
Kibbs, so other Kibbs, sister Kibbs, good to meet you. This is your brother, Coach Willis. Obviously, you can see the resemblance via skin tone. No, I just think that, like, to me, at this point, the ignorance is just like a choice. It's a choice. It's a conscious choice that's being made. It's a conscious choice to be ignorant and to not like be mindful of the things that you're saying. I think that's a choice right now. Like, for example, sometimes on Facebook, I say stuff to make people think. Other people call me a pot stirrer sometimes. But, you know, somebody was like, oh, well, I'm giving away my Jacksonville Jaguar gear because they didn't come out and stand for the national anthem. And I don't support anybody who protests the national anthem or the flag. And I'm like, do you realize, or can you please tag me in the one protest where somebody has said we should change the colors of the American flag, or we should go from stars to circles on the flag, or we should change the lyrics to the song. So what the reason I said that is because literally nobody is protesting the color of the flag, or nobody is protesting the words of the song, even though the second verse of the song is pretty messed up. But people are choosing to say, well, you're protesting the flag. See, it's like an ignorant choice. Like if somebody kneeling or doing something before a game starts, if that's what bothers you, then do the flyovers bother you? Does it bother you when the little kids are playing like a quarter before the game starts? Because if that doesn't bother you, then you really don't have an issue with things happening before the game starts. You know, it's just like how those fans booed in Kansas City when those guys locked arms, right? So it's like, what are you booing, right? So I think it's a choice that people are making, and I think that white privilege gives you the opportunity to make that choice, because I don't get to make the choice to not be black. I don't get to make that choice. That's something that.
And John, I agree 100%. And like the fact that even just the term decolonization, I don't have the choice of not knowing what that means, but I think a lot of people do, you know, like that's a term that most people don't even realize what that even means. So yeah, 100%. And thank you. Is it Layla?
Laylee.
Yeah.
Laylee, I'm sorry. No, thank you for sharing. There's so much of that where I was like, retweet.
I'll add too, I think just coming full circle to the point of these cat chats, there's always going to be a fine balance between figuring out, just having dialogue, listening to each other's stories, and then actually creating some action from that, and how can we actively shape the culture, starting with the level, right? The Linfield bubble, and then beyond that. And I think about the innate strength of athletes, because this is athletics. We're the ones bringing CatChat. This is how it started. And but I think about all of our athletes, and those of us who have been athletes, we know that growth doesn't come without discomfort or pain. And this is like, we know going into a workout, you're going to be uncomfortable at some point in that workout, but you know what that feels like, and you know you can handle it, and you push through it, and you know when to listen and say, I got to take a break. And we've talked about building that sort of stamina. John's mentioned that before, in this area, in having conversations that are uncomfortable. This pertains to, really, if we want to get really broad, right now it's important to talk about racism. It's an uncomfortable conversation, but it's important. It's important to talk about mental health. It's uncomfortable, but it's important. It's uncomfortable to talk about sexual assault and a culture where sexual assault is okay. It's uncomfortable, but it's important. And so these are things that I think for those of you who are on the call, who are athletes, who just go back, reference moments in your life where you've been uncomfortable, but you can get through it. And that's exactly the kind of stamina that we need right now for these ongoing conversations, because they are difficult. And so I'm glad that Kristen was on today to talk about storytelling and how to share and how to listen, and just trying to be more conscious about how to do that. I wrote down the 10 points from the TED Talk too. Just pick one and focus on it. But I think it's that kind of focus, the same focus that we give to our bodies when we're training for something that's important. This is the same thing. Give it to our minds, give it to our hearts to train for this.
Yeah, I want to add, you remember might have been our first couple of cat chats, and we talked about storytelling, just like other cultures, but the Polynesian storytelling is critical through song and dance. And of course, hearing your elders talk about the things that they've learned from their previous, other storytellers, their families, their elders. And I always think about the conflict that we're dealing with today. It's kind of like you've seen people do the hula, you do a dance. You may not understand what they're doing, but it's beautiful. And people watch it and they listen to it. And we're going to keep doing it. And eventually, if you care about it, you may join and learn more about it. And then think about how that is being done and what it represents. But a lot of times right now, a lot of people don't understand, but they're not appreciating the dance or the song or the story. And that's their choice, like John says. But we as storytellers, we have the obligation to tell the story. And people, whether they listen or not, we just got to keep telling that story. And I know some stories are hard to share. And it's difficult to do that. I'm bear witness to that too, telling my story. And because I've always been kind of to myself, but CatChat has allowed for me to share more. But being in the platform where you can tell your story, keep dancing, keep singing, and just be part of these conversations is so beneficial for all of us.
I think that's a great way to kind of wrap things up too. I think we just continue to share our stories. I'm really appreciative of everyone being on, sharing your part, and we'll just continue the storytelling journey on the next CatChat. Thanks everyone for being on. I really appreciate you. We appreciate you. And yeah, we'll catch you next Friday at noon.
Be safe.
Thanks, everyone.
Take care.
Yes, take care.
Bye.
Thank you all.
Thanks.